We're here, welcome back to the field, middle of September, starting to close out the growing season, starting to, estimate those last irrigation dates, and corn plants are really starting to shut down. One of the things that we've noticed really the last couple weeks is what we would call premature ear drooping. Or tipping, depending on what terminology you like to use. So we're looking at actually a competitive hybrid here, and we've seen it across a lot of hybrids, a lot of companies. So don't get me wrong, no one seems to be worse than the other, but we have seen a lot of hybrids really tip early, quarter milk line, so way earlier than normal. Some of the things that you can look at when evaluating this, obviously take notes on what hybrids are doing it worse, to make a mental note of that for future years. There's always some hybrids that will do it every year. The unique thing about this year is that we saw a lot of them do it way earlier than they usually do, and really didn't seem to be a stressful time. Usually when this happens it's usually September, and it's usually a 100-degree day and 30-mile-an-hour wind is when we start to see those ears start to tip down. With a couple hybrids this year, we really started to see it with low 80s, mid 80-degree days start to tip. So some of the things to look for, obviously, it does appear usually like hybrids with long ear shanks are a little bit more susceptible to that premature tipping or drooping. One thing to look for. Other things to look for is crown health, stalk rot, things like that, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and what we've covered in previous weeks as well. Really the key thing to look at is where's your milk line, when that starts to droop, and is the ear shank pinched? If that ear shank gets pinched, which this one really hasn't, this is a cutaway from one neighboring plant. The ear shank is starting to get pinched right there a little bit. As soon as that ear shank pinches, it's probably going to shut off flow carbohydrates from getting to the kernels. In the majority of times, that's what happens. Is if it's not totally eliminated, it is greatly reduced. So obviously things like that keep track of, keep notes on based on hybrids. And this plant actually that we were looking at actually did split the crown on it. We do have what I would call a little, it's definitely discolored crown. Looks like we're starting to see the beginning of crown rot there. So the causes of premature, ear tipping and stuff I'll say is not well understood. Around here, I attribute it to more of just cumulative stress during the season. And obviously we see a lot more of that on our sands than we do our silt loam soils. So, that cumulative stress, when we get hot at the end of the season, that often causes it. Maybe our roots or our crowns aren't healthy. So really that plant can't meet that physical need to get as much water, the ET demand for that day, to get as much water through that plant as it needs to keep all those cells turgid in that. So that's kind of what, the basic understanding of why we see it, especially around here in our sands. Definitely worse in our sands. As far as yield loss potential, it's really hard to estimate. There is some data from Purdue that says at half milk line or starch line, if you have premature ear tipping or drooping, you can lose up to 12% in those plants that tip. Obviously, a lot of this corn this year we saw quarter line or so when it started to tip. We're talking about a lot more significant yield loss potential in those ears that tipped. And that's another thing to keep in mind is yield loss is only going to occur in those ears that are tipped. So once again, that's something to just make mental notes. Obviously, as harvest rolls, you start to evaluate yield data. Keep in mind those hybrids or fields that tipped or drooped early, to make a mental note of that as you start to select hybrids for 2025. So with that, we'll wrap up this season of Agronomy Alerts, and we look forward to seeing you next spring. Thank you.